To wear a hat or to not wear a hat?
That is the question. So he's Chris and I'm Jeff, and we're the Bible guys. Okay, this is going to be the episode where we finally lose all of our listeners. It's a tough. Today's topic is a tough topic.
Okay.
So we need to start off a little lighthearted before we get into this one.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so this segment is called This or That. The goal is for both Jeff and I to answer these questions of which one we would rather do. So here's the first one.
Okay.
Jeff, would you rather go on a road trip or fly to your destination?
Ooh, what's the destination?
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a tough one.
Yeah.
So are we thinking this is all in the U.S. and if it's drivable?
Yeah, drivable.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say something like Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, well, how about let's say this Yellowstone. So I'm going to go to Yellowstone next fall.
Oh.
My preference would be to drive, but I'm being vetoed by the others in my family, and we're flying.
Oh wow.
But yeah, I would prefer
So
the
tell
road.
me
I would prefer
why-
the road trip.
Just scenery, stops along the way.
Yeah. You know, all the roadside stops, all that stuff. I like to be in it, not just suddenly land in it, right?
Yeah.
But it takes 24 hours to get there from where we live.
Okay, so anything over like 8 hours,
Yeah.
and I'm always fly.
Fly. Yeah.
Yeah, unless for some reason there was a motivation to plan stops along the way.
Yeah.
You're like, I mean, I'm not talking about the world's largest ball of yarn.
Oh, me. I'm totally into that. Totally. Route 66, every dumb thing to spend $5 on to go look at, I'd pay to go see it.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, not me. I'm a fly guy.
Okay.
Yeah, which is really funny.
Okay.
All right, so the next one is only be allowed to eat your favorite food for the rest of your life or never eat it again.
Wow.
And then eat everything else.
So would you rather be able to eat all the other things, but never be able to eat your favorite thing again? Or
is there any other
only ever eat your favorite thing and not be allowed to eat anything else?
Is there any other way to answer this question? Who would ever choose their favorite food, the same meal for the rest of their
For the
lives?
rest of life? I know. I don't know.
Nobody would.
I don't know. If it's a good ribeye with garlic mashed potatoes,
Yeah, and guess what? By year 5,
it'd still be a good ribeye with garlic mashed potatoes.
you would say,
Yeah.
I want to die. You'd be eating dirt.
I know. My head tells me I would need the variety. That's what my head tells me.
Well,
but my heart tells me, dude, if I could eat my favorite meal every day, I would.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. So this next question is: be able to shrink down to the size of an ant, or to grow to the size of a skyscraper. So basically,
is this like a superhero? Like I can go down and come back, or is it like I'm shrunk to the size of an ant forever?
Okay, I think it's to be able means to be able multiple times, I would think.
Do it over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So what
Ant-Man or
ability?
Godzilla? This is the question we're
Well,
asking.
Ant-Man can technically grow as well.
Yeah.
Remember?
No.
You've seen Avengers.
Yeah.
Remember he get real big?
I didn't remember that. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I forgot. Yeah.
Remember? And then Spider-Man wrapped around him.
Dude, I think you take it way more seriously than I do.
Hey, I just know how to answer questions.
Okay. What would you rather do?
I would definitely like to shrink down to the size of an ant.
That's the one I would pick too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big as a skyscraper, there's really not too much you can do with that.
Well, I've locked myself out of places before several times, and I've never had a time where I needed to step over top of something, it was too big like that. So, yeah.
And then the last one is a store where every item is free, or a restaurant where every dish is calorie free.
Oh, that's a no-brainer. A restaurant where every dish is calorie free.
Yeah, as long as it's a great restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely pay for that. Can you imagine what you can charge?
Yeah, I know.
If you had,
you'd be so rich.
Yeah. Hey, we have an ice cream sundae. It's a restaurant of just desserts. It's calorie free. Oh my goodness, you can charge a mint.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good. So that's a great segment, and we got through that pretty quickly, actually.
You want to find another segment? You want to just do? Let's fill our 20-something minutes with segments. You want to?
As opposed, you're trying
instead of getting into this topic.
Yeah, you want to avoid it.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
So you know what? We were talking. We wish we could just skip the hard stuff.
Yeah, right.
Right, and just go on. But the Bible talks about Bible teachers need to teach the whole counsel of God.
Yeah.
And so here's one that I think there's some nuanced views on this topic, and we have to take it from God's heart, not from the rules of the law. And I think when we understand that, then we approach this a little bit differently.
Yeah, and not only that, but anybody who, I shouldn't say anybody, but I should say most people who dive into this controversial topic, it realize that it's taken out of the cultural context greatly.
That's true.
Right. So there's a cultural context that's pretty easy to understand, actually.
But there are men who like to use this passage to hurt people with it.
Right.
Right? And
For
so we are
sure.
rejecting that idea
Yes.
from the foundation, the very beginning.
Yes.
Right? And so there is a principle in Bible study that the Bible is its own best commentary, meaning be very careful about taking a few sentences on one page and making this entire theological position on it. You have to take the words on this page and compare it to other words on the other pages in the Bible. And the only way that you can build a true theology is that those different passages that talk about similar topics can all agree. And if you can't help make them agree, then you are building the wrong theology, right?
Right.
And so be careful about just taking a few words out of this passage and not comparing it to all the other passages that God deals with the same topic.
Yeah. So chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, verses 2 through 16.
You read it. No, I'm kidding. I read it. He says, I am so glad that you always keep me in your thoughts and that you are following the teaching I passed on to you. But there's one thing I want you to know. The head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. A man dishonors his head if he covers his head while praying or prophesying. But a woman dishonors her head if she prays or prophesies without a covering on her head. For this is the same as shaving her head. Yes, if she refuses to wear a head covering, she should cut off her hair. But since it is shameful for a woman to have her hair cut or her head shaved, she should be wearing a covering. A man should not wear anything on his head when worshiping, for man is made in God's image and reflects God's glory, and woman reflects man's glory. For the first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came from man. And man was not made from woman, but woman was made for man. For this reason, and because the angels are watching, a woman should wear a covering on her head to show she is under authority. But among the Lord's people, women are not independent of men, and men are not independent of women. For although the first woman came from man, every other man was born from a woman, and everything comes from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it right for a woman to pray to God in public without covering her head? Isn't it obvious that it's disgraceful for a man to have long hair? And it isn't long hair a woman's pride and joy? For it has been given to her as a covering. But if anyone wants to argue about this, I simply say that we have no other custom than this, and neither do God's other churches.
There it is.
There it is.
So this
So
entire...
I'm going to step out real quick. You go ahead and cover this topic.
Yeah. Well, listen. Here's the thing. This is an overarching statement. I think that there are certain times where, when Paul is writing, it is obvious that it is a biblical principle that is spoken into the human condition.
Right.
When he talks about behaviors, desires, temptations, principles, right? General rules to follow. These are broad strokes of the human condition. These are applicable. Even sentences like a couple of days ago when he talks about like referencing Old Testament principles about oxen can be directly applied to human behavior and principles. And then there are other parts in the Bible where it is extremely obvious, and this is one of those cases where there is something happening culturally that he is writing something specific about. It's no different than in the Old Testament.
Well, I would say extremely obvious to you.
Well, yes, yes. But there are places in the Old Testament where he talks about tattoos and like wearing skirts, and there's these things that were just culturally specific in the Old Testament that some people might take out of context and say, oh, this is what it says. Well, no, that's what he was talking to. He was talking to the children of Israel. Yeah. At that time.
I would say when you're reading the New Testament, when Paul writes, Paul will tell you when it's his opinion, and if he doesn't tell you it's his opinion, like we just read in 1 Corinthians 7, he was talking about marriage, and he said, this is what I recommend. God didn't necessarily tell me to say this. This is what I recommend. I think is wise, right? So in that situation, he's not saying this is a command from God. This is me sharing my wisdom. Mm-hmm. Other than that, other than the times when Paul lets the reader off the hook by saying, this is my instruction, not God's, all the rest of what Paul writes is a command from God, right? But this passage ends with verse 18 or 16 that says, but if anyone wants to argue about this, I simply say that we have no other custom
Right.
than this, and neither do God's other churches.
Right.
So Paul's admitting this is purely tradition.
Right.
He's not saying this is a command.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that these are customs in our church. I just don't have any other way to tell you other than this.
Yeah.
Right? So this isn't under the authority of the Holy Spirit saying this is a new command to the church. This is a Paul moment. The Holy Spirit was having Paul answer their question using the customs of the church at the time. So we do know that he's dealing with cultural issues here.
Yes. And so this is the Life Application Bible, and these are the notes for 1 Corinthians 11, verse 2. And it says, in this section, Paul's main concern is irreverence in worship. We need to read it in the context of the situation in Corinth. The matter of wearing hats or head coverings, although seemingly insignificant, had become a problem because two cultural backgrounds were colliding. Jewish women always covered their heads in worship. For a woman to uncover her head in public was a sign of loose morals. On the other hand, Greek women may have been used to worship without head coverings. In this letter, Paul had already spoken about divisions and disorder in the church. Both are involved in this issue. Paul's solution came from his desire for unity among church members and for the appropriateness of worship services. He accepted God's sovereignty in creating the rules for relationships. So let's talk just about head coverings alone, okay?
Sure.
Head coverings alone was very cultural. We can see this even today. There's a yarmulke, and so Hasidic Jews.
Yeah, the round hat that they would wear
the
on the
little
back
round
of the head.
hat that they wear on their head.
That's right.
Is given as a sign to be under authority.
That's right.
Which Paul references here
That's what he's talking
about a woman being under authority.
That's right.
So we have a tendency to say, oh, that's placing them under authority of a man and all these kind of things. No, this is all woven together.
It's all symbolic.
Yes, it's all symbolic, and it's woven together. What again, first century readers would have completely understood. And by the way, I would argue and say the vast majority of people today see yarmulkes and they don't know what they're for.
That's right.
They look and they, why do they wear those little hats?
Right.
And it is because it's a symbol of being under authority.
That's correct.
And they're saying, God is my authority, and I'm under His authority. And by the way, that it makes sense now. And so you hear that, if that's new news for you, you would say, oh man, I had no idea, and that's kind of cool,
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because it is kind of cool,
Right.
Once you understand it,
Right. Which is true about so many things. When we read the words of the Bible and we get offended by them, it's usually because we don't understand what they mean or why.
Right.
We don't understand the why. And so sometimes it's just understanding why or what God is talking about. And then you go, oh, I get that. That's not so offensive then.
Right.
And so I think the yarmulke was a great illustration of that. He wears the yarmulke to show the world and to remind himself every day when he puts it on, I'm under God's authority.
Right.
In their culture, Jewish women would wear long hair to demonstrate that they were under God's authority, right? And so the head, let's talk about this. God is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of man. Man is the head of the wife. We think of head like the boss.
Right.
And that is not what it's talking about. It's where it comes from, right? So Jesus at the incarnation came from the Father. Now, Jesus is independent from the Father, but he emanated from the Father. Jesus is the creator. In John chapter 1 and in Genesis 1, we know that it's God's word that created. Jesus is the creator. And Jesus, man, came from Jesus. And then the woman came as a special creation from man, right? So all he's doing there is he's kind of like the order of where we all came from. We're all ultimately under God's authority. And this is why he's talking about mutual submission, because he says men aren't independent from women and women are independent from men.
That's right.
That is an incredibly important verse, because some men would use this to say women are lower than men.
Right.
And that is not what he's saying. Women aren't independent from men. Men are independent from women. We need each other, just like Jesus isn't independent from God. But Jesus did choose to submit himself to God. This is a submission of equals. It's not a submission of greater than and less than. Does that make sense?
Right.
So this is Jesus chose to submit himself to God. Jesus is equal with God. but he chose to submit for the purpose of coming and giving his life for sacrifice. And so in this situation, he's not putting together a hierarchy. He's just talking from a cultural standpoint. Hey, listen, in the Jewish culture, men don't pray with long hair, women do. Right? That's what he's saying.
Right. So the footnote on that in this Life Application Study Bible says the phrase, the head of every man is Christ, could mean that, number one, because Christ was present at creation, he is the creator of every man. Number two,
Yeah, there you go.
Christ is every believer's source of life in the new creation. The phrase, the head of woman is man, does not indicate the man's control or supremacy, but rather his being her source. Because man was created first, the woman derives her existence from man and is not from Christ, and Christ from God. Evidently, Paul was correcting in some excesses in worship, which the emancipated Corinthian women were engaging. The phrase, the head of Christ, does not mean that Christ was inferior to God in any way. That's, by the way, that's a pretty good comparison, right?
That's right.
Right, because that would mean that Christ is inferior to God.
Right. That's what I was just saying a minute ago.
Yeah. Though Christ was coming to earth, believers receive forgiveness and are united with God and with one another. So I think that's just really important to understand. And so many times, this gets taken out of context. And yet, just like you said, the Bible has its own commentary. When you stack up men versus women all throughout the Bible, it's so interesting. People don't recognize that Jesus advocated for women.
Oh, yeah.
So much more than people realize, because in that's
beyond anybody in that culture and that time. At all.
Yeah,
ever.
You would almost argue and say he stood up for women in a way that is magnified even more than any women advocate that we hear publicly
among the
today.
Pokot women, where the Pokot women, you and I have worked with the Pokot tribe,
which is in Kenya.
Yeah, the women are property.
Right.
But when the women learn about Jesus, they love Jesus and they will say, because Jesus loved the women.
That's right.
Right.
And back then in the first century, just because it existed didn't mean it was correct.
That's right.
Right. So women did not even have the ability to testify in court.
Right.
And so Jesus, what he did was he always raised the value of women. He always spoke on behalf of women. Even in the Bible, circumstantially, women were the first to the cross. They were the first to the tomb, which I love that part of the story. And so Jesus stood up for women and advocated for women more than anybody. And if you use the Bible as its own commentary, in Ephesians, Paul talks about mutual submission.
Right.
He talks about how men submit to women, just like Christ submitted to the church.
Right.
And how women should submit to men, and how these were equal. And so again, to take this out of context of its culture and to rule men ruling over women is just not what the heart of God was.
And he's reminding you this is a cultural conversation, so we're not being dismissive,
right?
Because it's easy. Some people would say, well, that was just their culture then,
right?
And unless Paul is telling you this is a cultural issue, it's a biblical issue, period. It's a God issue.
Right.
Everything else he says. But he does say this is a custom of ours.
Right.
Now, so the fact that he's talking about that, the note in for verses 14 and 15 in the Life Application Bible says, in talking about head coverings and length of hair, because remember he says it's a shame for men to have long hair.
Right.
It's a shame for women to cut their hair.
Right.
Right. Paul is saying that believers should look and behave in ways that are honorable in their own culture. In many cultures, long hair on men is considered appropriate and masculine. Right? Like think about the native New Zealand people, right? The men, or the Polynesians would wear the long hair. They're big, muscular men, right? That's what it's talking about. In Corinth, it was thought to be a sign of male prostitution in the pagan temples,
right?
For men to have long hair.
Right.
And women with short hair were labeled prostitutes. Paul was saying that in the Corinthian culture, Christian women should keep their hair long. If short hair on women was a sign of prostitution, then a Christian woman with short hair would find it difficult to be a believable witness for Jesus Christ. Paul wasn't saying we should adopt all the practices of our culture, but that we should avoid appearances and behavior that detract from our ultimate goal of being witnesses for Jesus Christ. That's really what this whole thing's about.
Yeah.
So he's only dealing with, you guys are having this problem in your church. So he's given us all kinds of theological stuff. Then remember, multiple times through this book, he says, and you asked me about how men and women, single men and women should treat each other. And you asked me about this. So he's answering questions from a letter that they had sent. So now here we are, and he's answering another question. You guys are fighting about this.
Right.
Should men wear hats or shouldn't they wear hats when they pray? Well, I always take my hat off when I pray. Do you? Do you take your hats off when you pray?
Yeah.
I do. It's a custom. It's what I do. I don't think you're going to hell for not taking your hat off. But in our culture, men take their hats off out of sign of respect. And all that. So this is the question that they're asking is, which should it be? Because they're fighting in their church. The whole letter was written to deal with fights that are going on in the church. Just a minute, we're going to read, tomorrow we're reading about the Lord's Supper. They were fighting about how to take the Lord's Supper. The whole book is him resolving fights in the church. And in this one, he admits this is just a cultural answer. I don't have this isn't the law from God. This is a cultural response. It's our custom. And what he's trying to say is, don't do things that will minimize your testimony in the world. So if the world around you in Corinth thinks when men have long hair, they're prostitutes in the temple, and when women have short hair, they're prostitutes, then don't you understand when you walk around with long hair, nobody's going to listen to your gospel. Nobody's going to listen to the message you have. Or women, you walk around with short hair, nobody's going to listen to the message. It's like you and me. The reason why when we go into the bush in northwest Kenya,
we wear long pants.
We wear long pants is because they won't listen to the adult men wearing short pants. Only boys wear short pants.
Right.
Right. So we're out there, it's 110 degrees and we're dying. There's nothing sinful about wearing short pants.
Right.
But the adult men won't hear us because we're sissies.
So Ryan,
That's how they'd see that.
So Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell just came out with something brand new on Apple TV. And I'm just going to tell our listeners, if they haven't watched this, hilarious. It's called Spirited.
It's the new Christmas.
It's the new Christmas thing, and it's totally a musical.
Right.
So I'm a musical guy. I mean, there's dancing. It's a Big Show musical. It's hilarious.
And it's loosely based on Dickens.
Yeah,
Loosely.
but don't give it away.
I won't.
Did you see it?
No, I saw the summary for it.
Okay. So basically, here's the one thing I wanted to say is that they were like back in the 1800s, and he says, "Good afternoon," and everybody went, "Oh!" And Ryan Reynolds goes, "Why did they scoff at good afternoon?" And he goes, Will Ferrell in his humor, he says, "Oh, back in the 1800s, that was a serious burn to say good afternoon." And then they had this whole song where they were saying good afternoon, and the whole crowd was going this, right? And it's hilarious. And then they go back to the 2022, and somebody says good afternoon, and then Will Ferrell turns around and goes, "You want to go?" And then Ryan Reynolds goes, "It doesn't mean that anymore." It's hilarious.
Right.
I mean, it's just so funny.
Right.
And so it's just one of those things where it was just a reminder that, like, it's not in the culture anymore. You know.
So the same authors. So some men, bad men, would use this passage to say women are less than men. But the same author of this passage, Paul, says in Galatians that in Christ there's no more male or female, no more Jew or Greek, no more slave or free.
Right.
We're
That's
all
right.
the same.
That's right.
To Christ. So when it does talk about submission, it's a mutual submission for the benefit of the others. That's what it is. It's a mutual submission of equals. This is not an equality issue. This is just a cultural address that he's trying to solve here. And that's it. So,
well, I think that's a fantastic place to end. And we will see you next time on The Bible Guys.